Good afternoon, cast members and friends, and welcome to today's cast webinar. My name is Allison Del Calzo-Barons. I'm the chair of the Morris County Community Assistance Services Committee. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to review. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the CAST YouTube channel afterwards. Second, comments and questions are welcome. You can enter them into the chat, or if you are connected to audio and you're not interrupting the presentation, you are invited to make comments or ask questions through audio. Just please remember that we are recording, so whatever you say will be recorded. This is the fourth and final webinar in the Connecting the Dots webinar series, presented together with the Drew University Neighbors in Need Project and the Morris County Fair Housing Committee. Our previous webinars covered updates and changes to landlord-tenant law, connecting tenants to information and resources, and connecting landlords to information and resources. Today's webinar is Enhancing Landlord-Tenant Relationships, New Insights to Improve Landlord Engagement. This webinar will examine affordable housing options in Morris County, including but not limited to the Housing Choice Voucher Program, share research findings from Drew University's Neighbors in Need, a community-based participatory action research project on HCV and landlords, and explore landlord engagement solutions and programs that are available. Today's presenters are Karine Blanc, Director of Multifamily for the Blau and Berg Company, Judy Pryor-Ramirez, Project Director for Neighbors in Need, and Sophia George, Project Assistant for Neighbors in Need. And I believe that possibly Alicia Alvarez, who also is on the Neighbors in Need project, will also be making a guest appearance today as well. So we're so excited to have you with us today. Please go ahead and take the wheel.
Go ahead and kick us off. I'm going to take control team of our slides and move us back to the home page. Again, we really want to thank, I'm Judy Pryor-Ramirez. So great to be here. I, as Allison mentioned, am part of the Neighbors in Need project at Drew University. And I want to thank, on behalf of the Morris County COC Community Assistance Service Committee and the Morris County Fair Housing Committee for inviting us to join in this collaborative effort to have brought these webinars to you all over the past few weeks. And so we are really delighted to sort of wrap up the series. And as Allison mentioned, this will be an opportunity for us to share some sort of foundational information. Karine's going to give us an affordable housing overview. Myself and Sophia are going to talk a little more in depth about Neighbors in Need, who we are, what we've been doing, the research that we've conducted over the last year and a half, 2 years. And then on the Neighbors in Need side, we'll also present some work that we've been doing to design what we're calling a pilot intervention to provide support to landlords in the county. And then Karine will also share from her standpoint ways to engage landlords. So we hope that you see this as a build, that we've been building upon all of the knowledge and information we've been sharing over the last few weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of, as I mentioned, our time will be spent in these sections. Part one, looking at the affordable housing overview. Part two, looking at what we've been doing at Drew. And part three, really thinking about what some of these strategies are, both from conceptual standpoints and designs that we created. I'd like to take a moment before we continue on to allow my co-panelists to introduce themselves to you. So I'll turn it over to the person I see next in my box, and that's Alicia. If you just say your name and introduce yourself. Can you hear me, Alicia?
Is my mic on now?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't coming on. Hi, my name is Alicia Alvarez. How's everyone doing? Thank you for joining us today. I am the co-chair for the Program and Resource Development Committee subcommittee. I'm also a community research in the project and also a voucher recipient.
And Sophia, you want to jump in and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'll go first. My name is Karine Blanc. I'm the Director of Multifamily at the Blau and Berg Company. I'm a commercial real estate broker. I help investors buy and sell commercial properties. So my day-to-day is really on the private side, working with landlords, and I sit on the board, so I'm also interested in affordable housing, and I've done extensive graduate level research in urban development and affordable housing.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia. I'm a student at Drew University. I've been working on this project now for this will be my 3rd year working on the project, and I am a student assistant.
Great. Thank you so much. And like I said, I'm the project director for the Neighbors in Need project, and have been working for the last year on the project. And we have some colleagues that I see that are attendees here that are also part of our Neighbors in Need. So we'll go over a little bit more about, like I said, who we are and what we've been up to. But now I'm going to pass it over to Karine. She's going to set some foundational context for our work today.
All right, so I'm just going to give a little bit overview on affordable housing. You know, us in the United States and many cities, not just in New Jersey, across the country, we're really in an affordable housing crisis, and that's across the board. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the stigmas around housing vouchers and affordable housing. But really, at the core of it, it's just that housing is just not affordable. You know, it doesn't have a lot to do with Section 8 and some of these other government assistance programs. You know, housing across the board it's just not affordable, even for workforce. That's why, you know, we've designed workforce housing, that sort of thing. Just to give you some statistics, you know, an estimated 12 million renter and homeowner households now pay more than 50% of their annual incomes for housing. If a family pays more than 30% of their income for housing, it's considered a cost burden. So for a long time, the rule of thumb was always, you know, 30% of your paycheck goes to housing, your monthly paycheck goes to housing. And now we see young professionals and just people in general across the board paying 60, 70, you know, sometimes 80% of their paycheck goes to their housing, and that's a problem we want to address. The other thing is the National Low Income Housing Coalition found in 2018 that a renter working 40 hours a week and earning minimum wage can afford a typical 2-bedroom apartment. It's nationwide. So there's not a single, at the county level, if we take an average of the rents in every county in the nation, someone earning minimum wage is spending more than 30% of their paycheck on housing. So there's not a county in the nation that is not cost burden when we look at the statistics and we look at the averages. Okay. So, you know, we might look into the details as to how did we get here and what's kind of driving this affordable housing crisis. So this chart shows the change in median rent and wages from 1960 to 2016. So really at the core of the issue is that wage growth is not meeting up with rent growth. The amount that rent is climbing far exceeds how much our wages are climbing, or not climbing, I should say. We are not seeing across the board, we haven't had a lot of wage inflation, just, you know, as a country, basic economics, we haven't had a lot of wage growth in decades, but housing prices have gone up and up and up, you know, sometimes 5% a year, but individuals across the country, we're not getting 5% a year increases in salary across the board. So now we've kind of gone we backed ourselves into this corner where we have a serious affordable housing crisis on our hands. And you can kind of see it shows the change in median wages, median rent, and percentage with cost burden. So again, cost burdens is anyone who's spending more than 30% of their monthly salary or paycheck on housing. And it's just really rocketed, and median wages have declined and, you know, had a little bit of volatility, but mainly stayed consistent over the last 55 years. And these are some of the kinds of housing subsidies that the federal government does and the government in general does. So it's not just one type of housing assistance. So the government subsidized housing in the form of mortgage interest tax deduction, tenant-based rental assistance, public housing funds, community development block grants, project-based rental assistance, and low-income housing tax credits. So these are the main categories in how the government funds or subsidizes housing. We're going to focus more on the housing vouchers, which is the tenant-based rental assistance. Sorry, I'm trying to see where are we? Okay. So we're going to talk about the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. So these are administered locally by public housing agencies. How it works is that the public housing agencies receive federal funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to administer the vouching program. So a family that is issued a housing voucher is responsible for finding that suitable housing of the family's choice where the owner agrees to rent under the program, and the unit may include the family's present residence if that applies. Rental units must meet the minimum standards of health and safety as defined by the PHA, and a housing subsidy is paid to the landlord directly on behalf of the participating family, and then the family pays the difference between the actual rent and what is subsidized by the program, if there is a difference. So one thing we definitely want to talk about is what are some of the benefits for landlords renting to So we want to talk about what are some of the benefits for landlords renting to tenants using this voucher choice program. So it's consistent rent paid by the government. That's one thing that working with landlords on the investment side, that's one thing benefit I try to play up as much as possible for investors who are interested in these types of properties, or investors, current landlords that might have a lot of vacancies that they're struggling to fill, and this might be a good option for them, having that opportunity to take on housing voucher tenants, is that consistent rent payment. You know, especially in time of COVID where there's so much uncertainty, people being laid off, this is a form of guaranteed income of good interest to people. And you have a consistent tenant base. You're never going to run out of tenants. There's not enough supply to meet the demand of housing voucher tenants. And so that consistent supply is going to help landlords struggling with vacancies. And then pre-screened tenants, you know, tenants do go through a screening process just to be eligible for the voucher programs. So a lot of the misconceptions about what kind of tenants might receive these vouchers can be, you know, we can kind of fight some of those stigmas a little bit given the fact that they are pre-screened to a degree. And targeted marketing. A lot of the public housing agencies allow landlords to market their properties on their websites should they choose to house a voucher tenant. And that's huge because a lot of smaller landlords, so properties maybe like 5 units or less, they really struggle marketing their properties. They're not a big apartment complex with a lot of amenities where, it's a lot easier to market those on the internet and a lot easier for tenants to find it. But some of the smaller ones, the landlords who have a single family they're trying to rent or a two family, it's a lot harder for them to market those properties and they struggle a little bit. So this is another benefit that through the public housing agencies, they can really get their property visible.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. So I'm gonna jump in now and kind of go to section 2 to talk about neighbors in need. And what I want to do is connect a little bit of what Karen was talking about with respect to Housing Choice Voucher and what we found in our research. Sophia is going to present the findings on the research, but I just want to give you a sense of who Neighbors in Need is, who is this group, what we've been doing and focused on. We were established in 2018. Through faculty members at Drew University, Dr. Keisha Moore. And the emphasis of our research is what's called community-based participatory action research. And so Keisha and other members of this research team developed this project in the context and bearing in mind the county's efforts to work on that 10-year plan to reduce homelessness. And we know that Housing Choice Voucher is one method or way in which we can address homelessness as an intervention, as Karen laid out. And so taking a look at what Housing Choice Voucher looks like in the county, this community-based participatory action research brought together a number of diverse stakeholders in the county to take a look at how to increase the number of vouchers issued out, how to think about bringing more landlords into that process, thereby, reducing homelessness. This project is federally funded, and our funder is in DC, and it's the federal agency called the Corporation for National Community Service. We have been really fortunate as a project to be supported by a number of housing organizations, other stakeholders, and community organizations who sit around our table, which we call the CAT. We're grateful, and some of you are here on the call today from folks from Family Promise, both the national office and Morris County, who have been a part of these conversations and the work, the Housing Alliance of Morris, MHA, Morris and Essex, Monarch Housing Associates. We've got a Landlord on our committee, housing voucher recipients who serve as community researchers and members of our leadership team that we call the Research Working Team, concerned citizens, and also community organizations who serve our community in different kinds of ways, whether it's faith-based organizations, hospital and medical care, or a group like United Way of Northern New Jersey. So just to give you a sense of sort of who's around the table and who's been a part of the conversations as we've been shaping and designing, what you'll eventually hear is our pilot program, which is the intervention. And you heard a little bit about it last week if you were on the call last week that talked about specific landlord engagement strategies. Next, I want to share a little bit about what community-based participatory action research is. It is an approach. It is a community-based approach. It's a partnership approach to research. And we were very deliberate in wanting to make sure what we call directly impacted folks are involved in this project. And so voucher recipients are a part of our research, as well as landlords, as well as other stakeholders who have expertise, who might come from housing agencies or work in other parts of the social service sector that provide insight. This is a method that deeply values, as you see here, and prioritizes collaboration, community voice. We particularly have been looking this past year at racial equity as a form of equity, not only within our committee and how we work, but how racial equity and racial dynamics and disparities play out in the housing and homelessness issue here in our county. And so in drawing on some research that came out from a couple of stakeholders over the last year, brought that to our attention and is allowing us to use that as a lens that grounds our work. Community-based participatory action research also really thinks about the local context in which it's situated. So our project is very much a project focused on Morris County with particular attention to Dover and Morristown. And in addition, this is a method or a research approach that while designing an intervention, while conducting the research, there's also a process of capacity building, building the leadership, building the strengths and the assets of those who make up this particular team. And so we do team building activities, we engage in regular evaluation and assessment of ourselves and how we're doing, what we're learning, and how we're growing. We see folks in this kind of model that folks are both teachers and learners in this process, and that we all have voice and an opportunity to share, and that information, that knowledge, that voice is all valid. And this is all toward an effort of what's called like social action, or that our research is for public purpose and for making a change or action in the world. And so those are the things that kind of hinge or hold the community-based participatory action research as an approach together, and ones that we have taken on in our own practice as the Neighbors in Need project. If you're interested in more information, take a look when these slides are shared at the link that I'll provide at the bottom that gives you a much more in-depth sense of this particular research model or approach. There are a couple of goals in the onset of this project as well. As I mentioned, there's a community advisory team we call the CAT. The CAT meets monthly, and it's formed or comprised of those entities and organizations that you saw listed on the first slide when I shared this project. Our goals have been threefold. One, to really uncover, understand, and articulate what are these barriers to housing our most vulnerable populations. And so that was something that the research surfaced. The project's goals are to identify the services and supports to landlords needed to effectively house this particular population. And so that has looked like us designing a pilot intervention that you'll hear about later from Alicia. We also, want to be building and communicating and sharing with the public and private entities so that we can build support for this pilot intervention, to build capacity to scale it and offer it in other parts of the county, while our focus right now has been on Dover and Morristown. And so we are looking for public and private monies to build that infrastructure and that support. And so these are the pathways that we've been kind of headed through over the last few years with these goals in mind. So as I mentioned, year one in 2018, 2019, kind of speaking in academic years, that was the year that we inaugurated and went through and completed the research study. Alicia was part of that research working team, as is Sophia, and Sophia will share more details about that in a moment. We also will be, year two, which was this past academic year, 2019, 2020, we took time to share what we found. We designed the intervention, where you'll hear Alicia talk a little more about that, and made presentations to communities to begin sharing this particular pilot intervention. And then the next year, we anticipate continuing to share our findings, continuing to build broader public support for this particular program, and we hope in 2021 to actually launch this pilot landlord support services program in the community. So I'm going to pause there. That gives you a little bit of background about who we are, what we've been up to, and now my colleague Sophia will walk you through the research and its actual findings.
Hi, everyone. So like Judy had said, this group prioritizes capacity building. So for the research, we had a sub-team called the RWT, which stands for Research Working Team. At this time, the research working team was composed of Dr. Keisha Moore, Dr. Susan Rosenblum, myself, and another student named Aleko Graham, who were the student researchers, Alicia Alvarez and Crystal Rodriguez, who were the community researchers. The type of research, methods, and the creation of the questions were all done by the research working team. So this was a very cool learning experience that not only I got to have, but the community researchers also got to share, because this was our first times working with hands-on research that was qualitative and quantitative. We also conducted the focus groups and interviews, handling all the technology and writing the questions for those focus groups and interviews. And then we also analyzed the data and had the firsthand experience talking with housing locators, voucher tenants, landlords, and property owners. And Alicia, did you want to share anything about your experience working on this team?
No, it was definitely a learning experience. It was something that I always remember doing transcribings and just being part of the whole process. Just very, it was very educational and hard at times, but I'm very happy that we got to do it and we all learned together. We were all in different stages of our lives when this project when we started this project. So it was very interesting to get everybody's input and everybody's insight on the research findings.
Thank you. For the research we conducted, we used mixed methods. So we conducted not only quantitative, but qualitative research. So overall, we were able to produce 8 focus groups, 7 of which were with voucher tenants and 1 with landlords, 7 individual interviews with housing locators and landlords. And we also conducted a survey for landlords and property owners. The survey included 22 multiple choice and open-ended questions and was mailed to 625 landlords in Morris County from a DCA list. And we had a total of 57 respondents. For our findings, I pulled the most common themes throughout the survey, and we found that the property owners, the 3 big things that attracted property owners to vouchers were the guaranteed rent, the opportunity to help, and the minimal turnover and housing vacancy. However, the 3 most prominent factors that limited landlord acceptance were behavioral problems, substance abuse issues, and tenant payment issues, which contradicts why they were attracted to vouchers if it's guaranteed rent, but they're still having trouble with payment. So for our focus groups and interviews, we were able to cover some of the themes of why there are existing barriers to housing the chronically homeless. So one of the existing barriers discussed was placing people with vouchers. For housing locators, they discussed their strategies for helping to house voucher tenants, some which included how the housing locators build relationships between the voucher tenants and the landlords in order to secure a mutual understanding of what the needs of each are. There were also talks of strategies for eligibility. Landlords discussed what makes a tenant eligible to live in their building and how they determine who is eligible for that, mainly by asking questions and how they answer or if they can answer at all. For the next bullet, several of the voucher tenants discussed the issue of transportation when they are placed in an apartment. It seems that there was little transportation around the areas that many voucher tenants were being placed, and that was brought to our attention through these focus groups. There were also inequalities in treatment in which the voucher tenants found they were not being placed in the same areas where other tenants who were not on a voucher were being placed. So it seemed to them that there was discrimination because they had a voucher. The last bullet that was talked about throughout the focus groups and interviews was displacement and trauma, and understanding not only the voucher tenants' displacement and trauma that they have suffered, but also understanding where the landlord stands with vouchers and his experience, if at all, with having voucher tenants or working with voucher tenants, and how the housing locator handles those relationships. And that was the majority of the themes from our research, and I will pass it on to Alicia.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you again for joining us. Following up with what Sophia was speaking about on our research, we used the research findings to develop the landlord engagement program. And so basically what the landlord engagement program is a county-wide landlord incentive program. And the purpose is to increase the number of landlords and number of units available for voucher holders. Why is this program needed? Due to the research, as Sophia was speaking about before, we hosted focus groups and surveys with both landlords and voucher recipients. And we saw a notable difference between the landlords who were working with a program and a notable difference with the voucher recipients that were also with a program, with an agency. Their stories were different, their experiences were different, different than other voucher recipients in the groups. And so we started to listen to that difference and really see, especially in the landlord focus group, the way that the landlords saw their experiences while working with the agencies, right? It was always very positive. And the voucher recipients, their stories were more positive. And, it just led to thinking like, what can we do? How can we use this to create this program? So there are organizations that already have agency-specific landlord-tenant programs, right? Like Family Promise, MHA, New Bridge, Homeless Solutions, and Community Hope. And we took a look at some of the best practices that they incorporate into the program and used them to help us design our program. But what is different? What is different by us, by having this program? And the difference is that you don't have to be assigned to an agency. We want to give the equal opportunity to everyone. The one thing is that you have to be, you must go through the coordinated entry, which is 2-on-1. How can this program fill in gaps? It can help by impact to expand voucher recipient rental availability. It can help by decreasing the stigma. It can help by shortening the length of time people spend being homeless. It can increase, case management for the people who are not affiliated with an agency, and for those who are, they will have another set of caseworkers, that would help in conjunction with, and increase in capacity for landlord relations, because that is the most important thing right now, is creating those relationships with landlords, having them feel comfortable and knowing that they have someone that they can reach out to. In the second year of our research, we broke out into different subcommittees, and the Program and Resource Development Subcommittee, which consists of Tasia from MHA, Ali from Family Promise, Russ from Morris County Housing Authority, Judy from United Way, and myself, a community researcher and a voucher recipient. And we looked at all the facts in front of us, what came out of this research. And so how and who is going to be using this program? Who's going to be the ones that are benefiting from it? We will be utilizing, like I said before, the coordinated entry in order to fully serve all the individuals calling to access homeless services in our community, giving an opportunity to all, not only the ones working with an agency. That was very important to us. We wanted to make sure that, since these best practices are working for these agencies who are already practicing them, we wanted to incorporate that and bring that into our program. So who are the people involved? Who are the stakeholders in this program? This program is a county-wide landlord incentive program, like I said before, so it is landlord focused. We want to help the landlords rent their vacant units to voucher recipients, right? We want to be able to make sure that the landlord utilizes, they start utilizing vouchers. We want to make it more appealing to them in that manner. But our main purpose still is the voucher recipient. We want to make more units available to them. We want to decrease the number of people becoming homeless and decrease the stigma, like I said before. So in reality, voucher recipients are our ultimate main stakeholder in this. And how will we do this? We're looking into, for the pilot, into getting 25 voucher recipients from the coordinated entry list for the pilot year, and to house about 25 families. And in order to do that, we need to get, landlords with that many units, whether it's 25 individual landlords with 25 individual units, or a few landlords with a lot of units. When and where will this program take place? Well, it's Morris County only, and the pilot will start in January 2021 with hubs in Dover and in Morristown. Those locations are the areas that we picked because it's close to transportation and more accessible to the voucher recipients to be closer to. It would just be easier for them to get to those locations and where the populations are. So how will this program be implemented, and what are the program components? So for the landlord support, it's financial and other. We'll have a landlord liaison, sign-on bonuses, education, counseling, training, help with completion of paperwork, which is something that they said, was very long. It was a long process, and they didn't always have the time to do it. So we'll come to them. The repairs for units, for pre-inspections and post-inspections, and the components for the voucher recipients. They will have case workers. So to those who don't have an affiliation to any agency, but also to the ones that do, it would be in conjunction with help with housing search, which we all know whoever's been in that situation is the most detrimental. You get 60 days from the day that you have your voucher, and hopefully this program is going to decrease that amount. Help with the paperwork. One thing that came out in the research was that a lot of the voucher recipients didn't even know what vouchers that they had. They didn't know how to explain this to the landlords. So, having a housing specialist and a landlord liaison who will be educated in the different vouchers will help greatly. Answer those questions to the landlord and educate also the voucher recipient. Move-in support. Again, pre and post inspections to make the whole process easier and help it move forward. So how much is this all going to cost? What is the budget? We created a lean budget and a robust budget. And the one thing that I want everyone to understand is that although we had to create both, because it all depends on the fundraising part of it, but we will make sure that we keep the fundamentals, the most important parts, the most important components of the program, whether we use. And this takes us to the fundraising. So the fundraising for this program is a collaborative effort between all the subcommittees and agencies who are involved to help fundraise for this entire program. I can quickly say that I personally have had an experience where when I was moving, in the apartment that I'm living at now, my landlord sold the house, and the new buyer was under the impression that both units were going to be the same amount of rent. It was a difference of $150. My previous landlord had promised me almost that, saying like, I don't want you to have to move. Whoever the new landlord is, I want them, to say that they're going to keep you. And so she ended up paying a year's worth of the difference in the rent, the $150. Came out to $1,800. And that opportunity gave my landlord to get to know me, to understand the program, and really get to see how the entire voucher system works. And to say we ended up signing a second-year lease with a new landlord, and he also ended up renting the other side of the other unit to a voucher recipient. So I know that this system works, that this program works, and just excited to get it going, and I hope that you guys are excited just as excited to have heard of it. And if you guys have any questions at the end of the webinar, I can answer those for you. Thank you. And I pass it on to Judy.
Okay, so I'm going to take over. So when we talk about landlord engagement, we really want to break it down into targeting landlords in 3 different categories. So that's current landlords, previous landlords, and new landlords. And I put this, in this particular order because what you have with current landlords and previous landlords, one piece of the problem has essentially already been solved, and that's that stigma portion. That current landlords or previous landlords, there is some part of them or the process that they are attracted to the point that they are open to having housing voucher tenants. New landlords, it's a little bit more of a challenge trying to fight maybe those stigmas or introducing them to a new process that may seem overwhelming. But with current landlords and previous landlords, we really want to hone in on those relationships, because essentially one piece of the problem is not as much of an issue. So let me move to current landlords. Okay. Okay. So with current landlords, we want to So with current landlords, we really want to get feedback for landlords that have housing voucher tenants through surveys, webinar programming, and outreach phone calls. So if we can stop the issue before there even is one, that's going to help us preserve the existing pipeline of landlords that we already have. So that may be asking what's working for them, what's not working for them. What would they like to see to improve the program? What would make them take on more voucher tenants? Maybe a landlord owns 20, 30 units all over the northern New Jersey area, Morris County, Essex County, but maybe they only have 1 or 2 housing voucher tenants. And can we expand that at all? Can we interest them in maybe engaging some of their other units in this kind of program? And really, we want to stop the issue before there is one. And if we can preserve the current ones, that'll alleviate a lot of issues, especially when we're talking about homelessness. If we can prevent one more eviction, or especially in this age of COVID, where when all when everything has been lifted and evictions might become a new issue, there might be landlords who want to evict some of the housing voucher tenants. So how can we intervene before that happens, before we send someone possibly to a lifeline of challenges finding housing based on one eviction? So really engaging current landlords in that sense is going to be very critical. And then previous landlords. With previous landlords, we want to get feedback on people who previously rented to housing voucher tenants and no longer do. And we really want to get to the bottom of that, because there was something that gauged their interest initially. Maybe that problem's been solved. So it might be asking questions like, what was their experience like? Are they open to renting to a voucher tenant in the future? Has any part of the process improved to better their experience? You know, how can we re-attract them? And identifying those issues, we can really bring people back to the conversation. Maybe they had a housing voucher tenant that just moved out, and now they have a vacancy and they just didn't know what the process was of getting a new tenant. So it could be that. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they had a negative experience. They did have a negative experience with the process. Maybe there's a part of the process that has either been simplified or that this program can address. You know, having housing specialists, having a direct line to someone who can alleviate some of these issues and intervene when possible. And then with new landlords, how can we compile a list of multifamily landlords and either send mailings to them or reach out to them in some way to get them the information. One thing is also with new developments in a particular town, if there's any type of new construction, a lot of times the developers have to allocate a certain number of the units to affordable housing. And that's typically determined by the level that the city already has affordable housing units, or if units in the particular community are trying to meet a certain percentage of affordable housing unit in the municipality, they might have a percentage than maybe the city average. So how can we have a conversation with those developers? What's their process of filling those affordable housing units? Is this program something they would be interested in? And if we're talking about larger developers or larger landlords, they might have professional property management, but maybe those are introductions that would be very valuable on both sides. So how can we reach them? How can we simplify the process for them? What concerns can we address and what biases can we overcome? I think simplifying the process in my work has been huge, working with the landlords on the private side. It may not be that they're not open to it or the stigmas, especially in very urban areas already, but maybe it's that the process seems daunting or overwhelming, and that's where we play up some of the benefits of having housing voucher tenants. So I'm going to open it up to questions and comments. I don't know if Judy or Sophia or Alicia had any other comments.
Oh, thank you, Karen. We wanted to make sure we open some space for attendees to ask any questions to Karen specifically about her expertise and what she's learned in her field, or to the folks on the Neighbors in Need team about the work, the research, and the design, the pilot program that we've been designing. You can drop your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and vocalize your question, whichever way you'd like to present yourself. If you don't have a question but have a comment or a thought or idea, feel free to also share that. A question from Jay in the chat box: where do you see this project going in the future? Jay, is that question particularly for the Neighbors in Need? I just want to make sure. So I also have some other colleagues that are on the call. I think I saw Art Presley, my co-pilot here on this project. The project right now, as we mentioned, the future is getting it off the ground and to be able to pilot it in 2021, as Alicia mentioned, in the specific sort of hubs that we've identified as Morristown and Dover. I think a future for the project would also to include other localities within the county. I would also say the project growing from more than 25 landlords or serving, 25 families, so increasing that number. We've talked about that as well. And I think one idea we've also talked about is how might we share the university partnership with communities, with voucher recipients, with housing organizations, and how might we share this idea of using community-based participatory action research in other localities and other people borrowing this method. So those are just about how the project could go in the future, in the short term. Thank you, Jay, for that question. I see another question from Lana. What are some good places to connect with landlords, any associations or local group spaces that you'd recommend for doing outreach? Let me turn that one over to Karine and see if there are some best practices that she's learned in her time and her role.
Yeah, so let me just make sure I have the question right. That is how to get in touch with the landlords, is that correct?
It looks like it from what Lana put in the box, like good places to connect with landlords, doing outreach with landlords.
Okay, sure. So I would say there are databases available. If you are trying to do outreach or a general mailing, I would definitely get in touch with some of the databases where you could essentially find names and addresses of landlords. Some of them you can filter by the number of units they own. So let's say, as we were talking about, maybe smaller landlords are an ideal fit for this program. You might be able to do a search on, okay, well, what names can we pull up for landlords that own less than 5 units in Morris County or in this particular city. And that might be the best way to do outreach in that sense, I would say. But once you have kind of a network or a list of landlords, from there you can do programming. These webinars are great, and there could be specific program around them, but that initial touch point, it would be kind of running a search, and I would recommend a physical mailing as the best way to contact them.
Alicia, Sophia, I'm wondering if there are things that we learned in the research about reaching out to landlords that you can share with Lana. I will say one of our colleagues, Vinny, who is working with us on landlord engagement, he has found social media to be another place for conducting outreach, and has found recently a couple of active Facebook groups of New Jersey landlords. And so if you'd like, Lana, we're going to leave our contact information. You can reach out to us and we can share some of those links. But Sophia, Alicia, were there particular tactics or strategies that you went to for the research part of it?
I would have to say it was, through the agencies who already have established relationships with landlords. But that's even hard to tap into, once you have a group of landlords, it becomes, kind of like protected, per se. But that's the only, I know that was one of the strategies that worked the best for our research.
For me, I think it was connecting just through other people in Neighbors in Need and figuring out who has connections to what organization.
And then there's another question about if it's a good step to take to expand this research onto other schools. I'm guessing this is a question for Neighbors in Need about taking our research to maybe to other universities. Jay, if you could clarify in the box a little bit more, that would be helpful. Okay. I think one thing I'll say from a perspective about community-based participatory action research is that method is, folks are using that across the country, across the world, in fact. And so there are researchers who really do take up very seriously this notion of research for action, research for the public good. And so certainly the method is one that is used. I think, there is, a possibility if other institutions are interested in being able to think about how to address a social issue using a collaborative process like that, whether the issue is housing, whether the issue is education or transportation or health, public health. It's a method that can be used in those kinds of ways. Thank you, Karen, for flagging. We do, as a team, have a hard stop at 2:30 because, some of us have other things to move on to, but the slides will be shared and you'll have our contact information, the links in there as well. And one final quick question, if there is, or comment anyone want to make, we welcome that as well. For Allison, Osmond, if you have an announcement that you'd like to make on behalf of the other collaborating partners for this series, we welcome that at this moment as well.
So I don't. Osmond, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
No, actually, no. I just want to thank everybody for being very informative. And actually, there's just one question. Do we have testers? How do we test the project and to show the fact that everything is working accurately? Do we get feedback? Is there annual reports, things of that nature?
You're talking about the pilot program that will be launched in 2021?
Right. Are there plans to, basically just get outcomes and feedbacks and reports, and how do we know? Is there going to be like annual reports as to what's going on, and or to the public, or another Zoom call or some sort?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that we recognize about our Neighbors in Need project is we are a collaborative research project, right? We're not a nonprofit. We don't have 501c3 status. And so we recognize that this project will need to eventually, this program rather, the Landlord Support Services program that Alicia mentioned, will need to live somewhere and be sort of supported by an agency and organization. So those are conversations we're also having. And I would imagine that agency would have measurement and evaluation set up to measure the progress of it. We had written a grant for some initial support to consider, how might we evaluate that. We did not receive funding for that, but it gave us a good start to think about what would an evaluation and measurement of outcomes look like for this pilot program, but something to think about with whoever that partnering agency would be, and you're right, what does the communication back? I think there are several members of our CAT who are part of the COC, right, the county's continuum of care, who also can share this out, and we certainly can stay in touch with your committee, with the work Allison's doing. At any time, we'd be happy to come and report back and share and figure out what that mechanism would look like. But those are my initial thoughts. I don't know if my colleagues on the call want to say anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you, Osmond. All right, so we are at 2:30. We thank you all for your time, your attention, your questions. You have our information in the slides, and have a wonderful day. Allison, I don't know if there's anything else you need to do to wrap up. Again, we're appreciative to have joined you all for this, for these past few weeks.
No, this was great. I have to say, this has been a crazy couple of months trying to plan all of this and get it all together. We've had a lot of people working behind the scenes and in the front of the scenes too, on this project. And I am so grateful to have been able to work with both the people from the Drew Neighbors in Need project and the people from the Fair Housing Committee. It's been a great experience, and I'm hoping that this is just the beginning of the conversation. I think that we can do a lot more work in this area, and that these collaborative projects are just going to keep on coming our way as we have great minds sort of thinking alike and thinking differently at the same time. So that said, thank you to Judy, to Karine, to Alicia, and to Sophia today for this wonderful presentation. Really, really interesting stuff. And thank you to everybody for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.